Support for this podcast comes from Novo Nordisk, combining drug discovery with technology to turn science into diabetes treatments. At novonordisk-us.com.
From WBUR Boston, I'm Jackie Leiden in for Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. The Stuxnet virus hit Iran's nuke program like a cancer. Destroyed it from the inside, we're told. Sent centrifuges spinning out of control. Flummoxed Iranian scientists. Frightened computer security pros here at home. Operation Olympic Games was a bold gambit from a president with few qualms about projecting U.S. power, from drones to special forces. This hour On Point, from hackers to commandos, America's secret wars. You can join the conversation. Should the United States government be in the cyber attack business? Is a cyber attack an act of war? Where's this all headed? You can comment at our website, onpointradio.org, or on Twitter and Facebook at onpointradio. And joining me now is David Sanger. He's the chief Washington correspondent for the New York Times and author of the new book, Confront and Conceal: Obama's Secret Wars and Surprising Use of American Power. David Sanger, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Jackie. Great to be back with you guys.
It is indeed a pleasure to have you here. David, this is getting a lot of buzz, but first, lay it out for us, if you would. What was Olympic Games, and where is it now?
Well, Jackie, Olympic Games was is a 4-year-long or more American program to use for the first time in American history a cyber weapon against the infrastructure of another state. You know, until now, Jackie, most cyber attacks you read about have been computers on computers, my laptop attacks your laptop, or an attack against, say, Boeing's industrial secrets, or an ATM network, or stealing passwords from Visa. This was very different. This is computers attacking infrastructure that until now states have only been able to destroy by bombing them from the air or sabotaging them from the ground. And it's a program that began in the Bush administration and was accelerated in the Obama administration after a quiet meeting between President Bush and then President-elect Obama just a few days before the inauguration in 2009, at which President Bush said to the then President-elect, look, there are two programs that you're going to want to continue. And one of them is drones, and the other is Olympic Games. Now, as you said, there's been a lot of news about this, and of course, there's far more in Confront and Conceal than just Olympic Games. It's about 7 or 8% of the book. The remainder is about Afghanistan and Pakistan, how the presidents responded to the Arab Spring, the fascinating tale of the president's evolution on Pakistan, on China. But in this particular case, it's a really interesting story about what happens when America gets a new and secret weapon, not unlike what happened when we first got the atomic bomb, or when the Predator first became available, or when intercontinental missiles became available during the Eisenhower administration.
Well, indeed, you write that a real Rubicon was crossed here, and I'm sorry, it's a fascinating chapter, Olympic Games, and you take us into the White House and the president's military advisors, and this becomes an incremental proposition for the president. Walk us through what he was learning so that we can learn about what's going on with him, the whole sort of thriller aspect of it, if you will.
Well, from the earliest days of his presidency, the president had to get up to speed on this cyber program that was one of the most compartmentalized in the United States. And so every few weeks, the people who were running Olympic Games would come down into the Situation Room and spread out in front of him a giant schematic diagram of the Natanz nuclear enrichment plant. They called this the horse blanket because it was so big. And they tried to explain, and he got increasingly into the details, how these attacks could get across what's called the air gap. Think of a sort of a giant electronic moat that walled off the Natanz plant from the rest of the world. Like most American companies, they took these sensitive computers and disconnected them from the internet so that nobody could get in. Mm-hmm. So that created the first challenge, which is how do you get across the moat? And then once they did that, they had to send in what's called a beacon that would essentially go in and map how the plant is built, how the centrifuges, which spin at supersonic speeds, are connected to these computer controllers, and then beam that information back to the National Security Agency, to Israel's Unit 8200. They were partners in designing this. And then design a cyber weapon. And there were many variants of this weapon, and it was slipped in very slowly and in small ways so that the Iranians at first believed that these machines were simply exploding or going out of control on their own. These were old Pakistani machines. They're pretty unreliable to begin with. So it was an easy thing for the Iranians to conclude that the machines were just breaking down. I compare it to driving around an old Ford Pinto. You're probably not old enough to remember those, Jackie.
Not at all.
They blew up somewhat spontaneously.
Did they?
What ended up blowing this operation wasn't anything that anybody leaked. It wasn't anything that anybody's written. It was that one day the virus or the worm was ramped up a little too much. Initially, the United States thought this was Israel's work and inserted into the system. And an Iranian engineer came along and opened up his laptop computer and connected it in, presumably to just do some maintenance work. And the worm leapt aboard his laptop. He probably didn't even know it.
Okay, now let me just pause here. And actually,
Sure.
I was teasing you. I'm old enough to remember Duck and Cover.
Oh, wow.
So there we are, hiding under my desk at school. When they were trying to get the beacon into the centrifuges, you say that it had to come in on a thumb drive. And I'm wondering, we know that Israel is cooperating with the U.S. here. How many people are in the White House, how they're picking targets, and who puts the thumb drive in the pocket of the Iranian engineer who's walking into the centrifuges?
Well, one of the big mysteries here is the Iranian engineers who are walking into the centrifuges even know that the worm was on their thumb drive?
And they don't know.
Well, I think there's probably a mix. My guess, and this is me guessing, but my guess is that there are probably, you can tell from the assassination of Iranian scientists that someone's gotten inside the system. I think there are some people who probably were witting and some people who probably were unwitting.
But it's got an Ocean's 11 quality to it, you say, because this thing is sort of telling the Iranian engineers that everything's okay.
That's right.
And by that I mean the movie.
Right. If you remember the Ocean's 11 movie, a favorite in our household, there's this great scene where they're breaking into a vault in I think it's a Las Vegas casino. And in order to fool the people who are running the control room or watching over the vault electronically, they play back a videotape that basically shows the vault empty. No one in it, nothing happening, while in fact the thieves are getting in and clearing the place out. Well, this worm did very much the same thing. It recorded normal operation of the centrifuges, and then when it began attacking the centrifuges, it played back signals to the control room at Natanz that said everything's fine, spinning just the way they're supposed to spin. And then all of a sudden people would hear explosions going on downstairs. And believe me, you don't want to be standing next to a centrifuge when it's exploding. It is moving at supersonic speeds.
Yeah. The first line of your book tells what happened eventually. It did destroy centrifuges. That's why it was so attractive to U.S. security. But then something went terribly, terribly wrong. The worm escaped.
That's right. The first words of the book are, "The worm was loose." And as I said before, an engineer goes down, connects in his laptop, goes home, connects into the internet. And he didn't know that this worm had gotten onto his laptop. And suddenly the worm didn't recognize, because of a programming error, that its environment had changed. It was no longer in Natanz. It was just out on the web like you and me. And it began propagating across the web. And suddenly this showed up in Iran, in Indonesia, in India, eventually in the United States.
Wow.
And people began dissecting it. And you may remember news stories from this time. It was in the summer of 2010. We ran very big, long story about this that my colleagues Bill Broad and John Markoff and I did in January of 2011 with a sort of forensic dissection of this program, which people came to know as Stuxnet. And so, while you're hearing many people run around on Capitol Hill now asking, are there leaks coming from the administration and so forth, the big break in this story was a technological error.
Well, we'll get to those leaks in the next part of the show. Right. But, I just want to ask one thing about this worm. Hasn't it been the fear that someone, as you point out, could detect these codes and then use them back against the U.S.?
Well, that's the big fear about Stuxnet. Once it got out, it basically showed people how to write an extraordinarily complex worm that can attack infrastructure. Now, this one was specifically designed to attack centrifuges in a certain formation. So if it was just on your computer and your computer's not connected to certain kinds of controllers and the controllers aren't connected to certain kind of centrifuges, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to lie latent. And that was a big deal for President Obama because he wanted to make sure that there was no collateral damage from this. But there was also an effort to try to keep it secret because the concern was that once other countries knew that the United States was conducting cyber war, they would view it as something of a legitimization to go conduct it against the U.S. or other targets, which is why the U.S. said nothing even after Stuxnet came out and even after the Iranians accused the U.S. and Israel of being behind this.
Okay, David, we'll go on with
on.
all the implications of this secrecy and the program, so just stick with us. I'm Jackie Leiden in for Tom Ashbrook, and this is On Point. We're talking with New York Times chief Washington correspondent David Sanger about America's top secret wars and where we're headed. With me today is David Sanger, chief Washington correspondent for the New York Times. I'm the author of a new book, Confront and Conceal, Obama's Secret Wars and Surprising Use of American Power, detailing President Obama's tenure at the helm of U.S. national security policy. David, as we were saying just before we went to the break, there has been a lot of complaint on Capitol Hill, the Senate Intelligence Committee, about your articles and leaks. On Tuesday, on the Senate floor, Arizona Senator John McCain accused the White House of speaking to, well, let's see who he mentions, about classified ongoing intelligence operations, and he also called for the appointment of a special prosecutor to dig into the matter.
The author of the article, Mr. David Sanger, clearly states that former and current American officials spoke to him but refused to do so on the record because the program is both highly classified and parts of it are ongoing. I repeat, administration officials discussed a most highly classified operation that is both highly classified and still ongoing.
So what about that, David Sanger? We have you right here. Is the Olympic Games program still ongoing?
There's no reason to believe that it's not. This is an evolving program. It's taken many forms over the 4 years it's existed so far. And, the Iranians, as I said, got onto it because of the code that got out. They built up new defenses and, cyber conflict around the world, whether it's trying to update your personal computer against the latest piece of malware that's out there, or whether you're defending a bank, it's a constantly evolving effort. That's why you keep getting those security updates from Microsoft every few weeks, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's no reason to believe that this has ended, but it may well have changed form or targets. To the broader issue here, though, look, you don't produce a book overnight. The emergence of the Stuxnet worm and the way it became public created a thread to pull on, and it took about 18 months working from the bottom up to try to figure out what this was part of. I looked at this and said, this didn't happen by itself. It just didn't appear. There had to be something behind it. And that's the effort. Now, the book is about far more, of course, than just cyber war and all that. It's a broad look at the national security policy, everything from Arab Spring to how the president handled Mubarak, to
and we
Libya and
we
Syria.
will drive
and we'll
down
do
on
that. But this is a critical element of it.